Okay, so we thought we'd try something a tiny bit different here. I've had the good fortune over the last 3-4 years now to have spent quite a lot of time in conversations with prospective customers, existing customers, analysts, various stakeholders, listening to Costas talk about the challenges of managing supplier master data and how you overcome those and how you implement a successful master data strategy. And so that's given me a fortunate perspective, I think, which enables me to put to Costas a series of questions to help us walk through this. Your job as we go through this is to kind of keep me honest. So some of the content we'll tackle is a tiny bit involved. We're not going to go too deep. But if there's something that's not clear, raise your hand. I've been in conversations where the Costas says something, the customer explain that, and we go into it in a bit more detail. So let's take that opportunity to do so today. We really do have an expert. So I'm going to just ask Costas a series of questions, and we'll talk through the topic. And then there will be a chance to have some Q&A at the end. So with that, I think, Costas, it makes sense to start with objectives. We've talked about it a number of times already today, and I think we sort of assume we know why supplier data problem needs to be fixed, but let's make sure we're aligned. So kind of in your words, from your perspective, why should companies fix the issues around supplier data, and why should they do so now?
Yeah, so I think there's two kind of big reasons. The first one has been artificial intelligence, AI. That's been a big driver of data. We also heard that from Eloise, but I think that's nothing new these days. The same thing that Eloise said, you just have to kind of fix it because of AI. But the bigger reason actually is customers want to collaborate more with their suppliers. And we've heard a lot around collaboration, and I know it means lots of things, but in reality, that's the situation. You want to collaborate on a lot of different use cases, not just a singular kind of thing. But the reality is that if you don't have engagement and adoption from your suppliers, any investment you're making in digital capabilities is going to go to waste. And what we've seen in the way we pitch it to customers is there's a maturity journey, which is you want to get to this, what we call collaboration phase. But the reality is there's a lot of hard work, which many people maybe didn't want to address, but in reality you do. And we pitch it as, look, there's a foundation phase, which is you got to get your data in order. You have to be ready to be best of breed ready is what we call it. That means data consolidation, integration. Then there's an engagement phase. You need to change culture, change internal mentality of how you work with your suppliers to drive them to a portal, to a single channel. Be communicating with them. You want to set up that single channel strategy. And then we have customers in that collaboration phase where you come to the point where they say, hey, I've got 40,000 suppliers logging in daily, and that's fantastic. And when you get to that stage, that's actually gold dust in terms of value. And I'll give this through an example from this customer. Eventually they wanted to reduce AP invoice inquiries with their suppliers. So this is a very common one, show status of invoices in a portal. But they actually managed to sell their entire 5-year business case in something like 3 months. Why? Because they didn't have to go through this journey of enabling suppliers. You have this immediate value. And in general, for all these use cases, even we were talking before, to get to that collaboration phase is really important. But you cannot do that, and you can't do process orchestration and all these things without the data foundation. And that's why I think now today, for everyone, this is super critical, because that's where everyone wants to get to.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I think it's entirely consistent also, thankfully, with what Eloise was saying earlier about there being no excuse to address it. Okay, so I mentioned in my earlier comments, in my opening comments, that this is hardly a new problem. I referred to the CPO survey that Deloitte does every year, proving again that data is the single biggest barrier to digital transformation. So we've talked about why you should do it. Why have we failed to? Why is it you think most projects fail, or why are people still struggling to address this?
Yeah, so look, the reason this has been such a struggle is, this was also brought up, there's been no ownership of data. So the problem hasn't been touched for a long, long time. So then big companies are faced with what feels like a very overwhelming challenge, right? That's how a lot of them see. And when we're overwhelmed as people, we look for the easiest or quick fix route. And the quick fix routes, which most people, and a lot of you will have faced this over the last 10, 20 years, have been as follows. So first way of fixing this problem was the old mantra of, hey, buy a P2P, S2P suite, single system, that's going to solve all your data problems. I'm sure almost everyone in this room has implemented some kind of P2P, S2P suite, yet you all still have this data challenge. The other one is everyone has been driven with this idea of the ERP, and let's try and manage it all within the ERP system, and this will also fix it, and they've driven data strategy around the ERP. And I think we're going to touch on that a bit deeper in a moment, so I won't dwell too much on this one. Then there's this whole idea of we have a data problem, it's dirty, we got to clean it. So people have seen it as a one-time thing of, hey, let's just clean up the data. In reality, your data changes all the time, so it's not a one-and-done kind of activity. The other really easy one, that's more a public sector thing. I don't see it in business because I don't think it would work, but it's this idea of policy. Hey, we'll just define our data policy, and then it's up to everyone else to implement it. And this doesn't work. Then there was also this idea of outsourcing that was always a big trend the last 10, 20 years, and it was, hey, we don't want to fix it. We're just going to ship the problem somewhere else, a lot of cheap bodies, and they're just going to magically fix this massive problem for us. And this hasn't worked. And then a lot of us also resort to data providers, Dun & Bradstreet, BVD, there's many of them. But this also doesn't work. And the reason this doesn't work, which I think many will have also faced this, is what typically happens is you're going to extract your data. You're going to send it to a DNB, a BVD, whoever you're using. They're going to do their magical kind of cleansing process. And then comes the moment of saying, okay, we've cleaned it, and now you're going to load all of this back into your ERP, your financial audited system. The reality is no one can load this data back into the ERP because you don't know where goods are going to go, where they're going to come, how you're going to pay your invoices. So these have been historically how people have tried to address it, but it's really fallen short and not solved the problem to date.
Okay, perfect. So we tried to understand why we need to do it. We've had a bit of an understanding of some of the reasons we failed up until now. Let's kind of go a level deeper into the challenge. So one of the things I hear most commonly in the conversations I've been party to is I keep hearing about this term data hierarchy. And I know this is something you, in your view, is super important. So explain to us why. Why is data hierarchy so important?
Yeah. Well, we have an exciting slide here for you, so don't worry by the challenging slide. But the idea of data hierarchy and the way to understand its importance is you need to consider all of your data stakeholders is the way we like to present it. And I'm always confused right or left. This starts from your right, but one data stakeholder is the ERP system, whether it's SAP or Oracle, and they have a need for data in a certain way. In fact, one of the problems, by the way, for SAP customers is in SAP, a vendor is an address. It's not really a vendor. And a lot of customers center their whole data strategy around how the data is in my ERP, my SAP, my Oracle. This is problem number one because they are just one data stakeholder, okay? And you will have many other systems which are also other data stakeholders. So if you center your strategy around that, you're going to have a lot of problems. Then you have another stakeholder, which is the local business, right? The people in the UK, in Germany, in Switzerland, in the Netherlands. They want to have a local view. They don't want to have the complexity of what everyone else might be doing, right? And then we talk a lot about suppliers and getting engagement and adoption. And the supplier is another critical stakeholder. They're not interested in your complex landscape, that you have the same record in 10 different systems and you're using them across 200 different company codes, right? That's never going to be able to engage them. So you have to consider the supplier as a data stakeholder. And then, of course, we want to do other analytical use cases. We want to run spend analytics. So we want to roll things up into parent-child relationships. And the hierarchy is important because it helps you understand that you have a lot of use cases which don't fit with the traditional ERP mantra anymore. And moving to kind of the next view is the hierarchy also drives success in integration. A lot of people complain and talk about the challenge of integration with a best-of-breed strategy. The reality of why this is such a challenge is you've centered it around the wrong hierarchy. If you have the right hierarchy, you can say, in my transactional systems, we'll send the ordering and the invoicing address. In my contracting system, we're going to send the legal entity, which actually typically doesn't exist in the ERP system. For doing something like sustainability, we might want to do it at a global ultimate parent company because we don't want to ask if it's J&J 100, 200, 600 times for each legal entity they have in the world, we want to run that business process at that level. So it's twofold. Business processes run at different levels of that hierarchy today, not just at transactions. And it also helps you in integration. If you don't have the right hierarchy, you're going to struggle actually in your data strategy being foolproof from an integration perspective in the long run.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Remember, if there's any clarification, you got to ask, so we'll keep going. But so you mentioned SAP then, and I feel pretty confident in the room that probably over half and perhaps even more people will be using SAP. And so let's have a little bit of a dig further into the SAP situation specifically. So I imagine a number of you have either started or are dreading the point where you have to start the ECC to S4 migration. You might be using MDG, which is SAP's master data governance platform. You might be using Ariba, SLP, the lifecycle product. So it seems to me, if you look across that product landscape, that SAP really should have you covered. It has the data governance, it's got the ERP, it's got the lifecycle pieces, and of course the procurement suite. And yet, a significant proportion of HICS customers use SAP, and we continue to have inquiries from companies who have that stack and they're struggling. So perhaps you could help articulate why it is that, despite that stack, we still have problems with supplier master data.
Yeah. So we don't want to take a huge dig at SAP, but it's a very common question because there are a lot of SAP customers who use that stack of Ariba SLP, SAP MDG, and then into the ERP systems. Don't worry about the slide, it's too small to read very likely, but the problem is as follows. Number one, Ariba SLP to SAP MDG doesn't integrate well. What that means is only about 10 fields when a customer wants to manage all the fields. The other issue is it's flawed in the sense that your workflow is going to be disconnected. You collect data from a supplier in Ariba, you send it to MDG to validate this data. If the data is wrong, forget that it doesn't integrate all of it. You actually have no way to tell the supplier to go correct it. What this means is someone now is going to email the supplier and you're going to be offline. Now you have data updated in MDG and your ERP systems, but it no longer matches what you have in Ariba. And the whole architecture in a way is flawed. If you look at data quality best practice, I always use this quote, which is only 2 moments matter in a piece of data's lifetime. The moment it's created and the moment it is used. And data quality happens when you create the data. So in theory, the system which you have where the supplier is doing the data entry should be doing the validations. Ariba doesn't do that. Right, that's done in your MDG. So immediately you just have all these things where the architecture is flawed, which is why a lot of customers have struggled. And then the other one, which is very interesting, Eloise brought it up. Again, that little screenshot on the bottom is our example when we get an RFP to respond to and we have to go into Ariba, there is also 20 HICS is already there. It's the same HICS because there's only 2 legal entities in the world of HICS. We're not a Kearney. But it is very challenging, right, even from that experience point of view. So these are really why so many customers are challenged trying to use the SAP stack to manage this. It just hasn't been set up really to do that.
Okay, and I guess it's summarized in these are transactional systems rather than master data. Okay, so let's push on that a little bit more though, because this always happens in conversations with people who are interested. One of the things I hear from customers that use SAP is that they struggle to understand SAP's limitations. There's a flat data model where each supplier is an address. But what are the real limitations? Why is this such a challenge?
Look, I think the challenge goes back to that hierarchy. You run business processes at different levels of this hierarchy. So the limitation is this is a transactional system. It has nothing to do with SAP. By the way, there's nothing wrong with SAP. It will be with any transactional P2P, etc. system. They're optimized to be good at transactions, where we live in a world today where we want to manage complex supplier relationships. So imagine now you need the legal entity to do a contract. That legal entity typically doesn't exist in SAP. You want to run sustainability at a global parent. That company will never exist in SAP. And very likely your finance team and your CFO will never want them to exist in your SAP. This is, again, our financial system. You want as little noise, quote unquote, as needed, right? It's a transactional financial system. So we should try and keep it to that. So it's good at that, but that's really the limitation. If you want to try and build hierarchy and all these things in SAP, apart from the fact that you probably won't be allowed to do it, it'll be very costly and challenging to do it.
Okay, good show. So another question I hear a lot is around data cleansing. So it seems intuitive or logical to me that I've got bad data, dirty data, so the first thing I need to do is cleanse it, right?
Right. So here we're going to reveal the secret. And the secret is don't focus on cleansing if you want to do data cleansing. And we'll kind of explain. For me, the light bulb moment was actually watching a documentary around ocean cleanup. So you see one of the quotes there. And that became a really good way to explain this to my customers, which is your dirty, messy supplier data is a complex problem like cleaning up our polluted oceans. But environmentalists and specialists say that 95% of the work is to stop polluting, and 5% is the actual cleanup. And it's the same issue with big companies. Everyone focuses on this cleansing, but how do cleansing exercises really go? It's, again, we're going to take the data out. Then you're going to have a team working on it in Excel spreadsheets. They might use other specialist tools. They might use data providers. And they'll do all this work for 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And what's happened in those months is obviously the data in the systems has already changed. And now imagine you're having to do this with lots of other systems. So that becomes really problematic. And the reality is it doesn't work. So of course we want clean data, but the approach is you have to control the entry point. So our focus is very much around get data consolidated, so clean in the sense of how do I link records. That is important to help you consolidate the data into a central point, and then you need to control the entry point, supplier onboarding, and nobody touches those ERP systems. Now you're in a position that you've stopped polluting. Now that you've stopped polluting, I can guarantee a customer that 6, 12, 18, 24 months, eventually you're going to have wonderful data because you've addressed kind of the root cause. If you just focus on cleanup, whether you're using AI, all these things, it isn't going to work. So focus on consolidation and not whether it's LTD or limited in your data. That's far less important. Initially, once you control the entry point, then you can run all these rules and processes to have great data.
Okay, so I'm going to go slightly off script here because you said something several times there, and I just want to understand. So you talk about controlling the entry point over and over. So by implication, I think you're saying that what you don't want is people going into the ERP and making changes and adding records. So I guess my question is that reality? I imagine most of the organizations here have got individuals within finance, maybe other teams that are accustomed to going in and making changes in ERP, and we're just going to stop that. Is that realistic? Do customers actually do that?
Yep, a lot of our customers, or pretty much all of them that use us for onboarding will do that. And for sure, all the major ERPs support the functionality to block vendor updates and creation. And you want to do that. You might want a couple people from a business continuity perspective if something happens. But absolutely, you do not want a backdoor, not just from a data perspective, but eventually, you're doing this to control from a risk, from a fraud. You're changing banking data. There are SOX controls as well, where you want to disable vendor creation once you go live with a SIM solution.
Okay, makes sense. All right, so I've just got one more question. So we've talked a lot about the technology, some of the challenges we face, but I think what also be really useful to do is to think about, in practice, how do we embark upon a master data project? So it would be great to hear some thoughts on either some top tips or common mistakes to avoid or best practices when we're actually going about implementing one of these projects.
Yeah, so maybe highlight few elements. So first of all, you have to see it in the correct light. This isn't a technology problem or a project. It's a business transformation project. So we need to look at it from that point of view. We're going to change behaviors internally to our suppliers. And when we go into a project, we'll talk about governance, process and data, and then our technology. And typically, if you get the first two right, then the technology will always be a success. And why are these important in that order? Supplier data is extremely cross-functional in its use. So governance here plays a big role because many stakeholders will touch it. So this will be things like making sure we have a data governance board before we go into execution, because who's going to be making these decisions effectively before we go kind of in project implementation mode, which of course is cross-functional. Then this board will have to help define a lot of these things, like we talk about cleansing, but how are you going to cleanse if you haven't defined standards and definitions? And who's going to define those standards and definitions if you don't have this governance board? And then, you know, ERP systems are transactional systems, so they have what we call in the industry as duplicates by design. They're optimized for processing transactions. So sometimes we see practices from customers where they will create duplicate records because it is more efficient to do an AP run or an AR run with that. So these are duplicates by design. So again, if you're going to clean up data, you have to have defined these things. If not, you're going to get into execution mode and be arguing about these details. Or we talk about survivorship rules. Which record is going to stay, which record is going to go. We have practical things, right? We have open POs, open invoices, all these sorts of things. We can't just turn the records off and delete them. So governance is a really important part, probably the most important thing. Then process and data. And then in execution mode, we think about it in 3 phases, which is consolidation. So that's very critical. Bringing all the data together and doing that quickly, because big companies, data changes very quickly. The longer you take to roll out, the more problematic it is. So we actually try and get every customer rolled out and consolidated within 12 months, even large organizations, you know, 100 billion turnover plus, because that's super important. Then it's data maintenance, and then integration with that.
Okay, excellent stuff. Thank you. All right, so whistle-stop tour through supplier data. Do we have any questions from the audience? Any level of detail? Anything you want to ask Costas on this topic? I have the mic to throw at you. Yep. There we go. I will just pass it to you. There we go. All righty.
So in terms of value, what is more or less the percentage that you have seen with your clients when they finish the implementation or when they do a pilot?
Value, so it will obviously depend on the organization, but one is going to be, you can, if you're a large organization, for sure, FTEs. So typically, when you look at this, even in terms of data management, a large corporate will be using anywhere between something like 20 FTEs around data management. So typically, we can take out a good portion of them. So 13, 14 headcounts, right? But this won't be the real value. The real value is going to be in what you can do later on, where I mentioned you get to the point of supplier collaboration, and then you deploy initiatives like reduce AP invoice inquiries, and you can make a 5-year business case there in 3 months. So when you position it, if you need the very early stage business case, data is always a hard business case, by the way. In a large corporate, you have to go initially with FTEs if, frankly, the organization can't get it to the point of LOEs earlier on, which is, it's a leadership failing if, in the world we live in today, you can't prioritize that you need to have good data, because everywhere you look, everyone is talking about it, right? But if you really need to do it, you will find FTE savings initially. Long term, you can go around all of the digital initiatives you're trying to do with your suppliers. You can quantify big chunks of value, whether it's risk aversion and compliance, or also around AP, and also around supply chain. I think you're going to hear also some of that with J&J as well later on, of how they have sold the business case around some of these things.
Excellent. Any other questions? Oh, that's a short throw.
Super, okay. What's your opinion about engaging with the suppliers when you do the data cleansing? You would rather go and ask them to enrich the data, or would you all the way surround with the business and the external sources?
No, so typically we wouldn't ask the suppliers to support the data cleansing. That will happen as a natural evolution, right? So typically you go live and then all new suppliers are in good shape, and then over time, right, some suppliers will phase out, and other ones, as part of that ongoing master data maintenance, they will get engaged to update and maintain data, but there isn't necessarily going to be a campaign of, hey, go and clean up your data. And as much as possible here, even with that, you're going to use third-party sources to minimize, wherever you can, the human data entry point.
One at the back.
Big throw.
Quick one. Two questions, quick hopefully. How long it will approximately take to be, from 0 to have X implemented? And start with this one, I'll come back.
No, like I said, I mean, we've spent a lot of time focusing on the implementation journey, by the way, and the technology, not just doing the final stage, which is onboard, update, etc., because we've been doing this now for a long time, and most of these projects fail in the implementation because they are hard projects, okay? And by the way, a lot of our customers come from failed implementations where then we are brought in. But because of this focus, typically we will have, let's say, a first go live, it depends on the size of the customer, but something like 4 to 6 months, and we want a global rollout by 12 months. And just to give you an example, there's many cases like this, but Baker Hughes, 5 ERP systems, 600 company codes, 240,000 records, this can be done in a 12-month time frame.
And this was my follow-up one, exactly. If you choose, I mean, at what point, we're all transforming one way or another, digital procurement transformation, it's probably why we're all here. If you can choose, where would you plug X into a transformation journey? Do you start there? Do you do it in the middle? Do you do it at the end?
I would plug it in the beginning. I think, again, I've been now doing this for 20 years, since 2000, so when Ariba was first coming out, for me, it's logical to start with a data foundation, okay? And I think we are all paying the price because maybe we didn't and we focused on the transactional side, but all transactions link to an identifier, okay? And if you don't have that identifier or that strategy clearly defined, it's a problem once you start having transactions. So for me, data foundation, even though it's the hardest one because to the value question, that's a hard one, right? But it is the most logical step if you want to do this correctly, right? If you do it afterwards, it's also fine, that's what we're doing. It just becomes much more challenging. So when you are implementing Greenfield, I would always start with data foundation and overlay transactions later on. In fact, this example of the AP invoice inquiries, because we had data foundation, bringing in invoices into a portal when I'm already integrated with all their 13 ERPs is actually a very quick project to do, right? But if you don't have that, that becomes a very complicated project to do.
So for me, fundamentally, no matter what systems or processes you have involved, it comes down to the people. People enter data, and a lot of them don't care about the data they enter. How do you get them to care?
Oh, Adam has
Philosophical
caught me off guard here. No. Look, fundamentally, there's two things. One, we are trying to remove the people from the redundant data entry, right? Because it is hard to make them care. But I don't know that they can't not care, right? In the sense that these are things which companies need to do and need to comply. So I'm going to maybe reflect on what was said earlier on, that you have to show that you are serious about these things, right? And I think if they don't care, it's probably that you internally aren't taken seriously and aren't caring, right? Or aren't having the right metrics around it. But if you're taking this seriously, they should care. And then it's that whole thing is you need to try and drive good engagement with your suppliers. I think people forget that. They kind of stand up some kind of portal and then forget about it, or they lose steam. The customers which have 40,000 suppliers logging in daily, they were very explicit about their strategy in the sense that even though they wouldn't do that, they told their people, their buyers, to say, look, if you can't help us, we're a big company, right? We need to do things in an efficient way. We're going to look for another supplier. It's not that we don't like you, but there's no reason why you can't be doing that, right? So, they send out monthly, quarterly newsletters, again, to drive that kind of engagement. So I think you need to drive engagement with your suppliers so they see that you care, right?
Feels like it's a little bit like Ollie was saying earlier about show them you care and also help them. So remove the friction is helping, right? If it's really difficult to make a master data update change or provide some compliance information, they're less likely to do it. But if you're serious and it's easy, your chances are improved.
And that's it. Look, we try and make it as easy as possible. I mean, supplier experience, that's really the fundamental. It's can we tailor it, can we personalize it as much as possible? That is, of course, what we try and do from the technology side.
So what seemed like an awful question actually was a great setup. Appreciate it, Adam. Thank you. All right, so we have about 2 more minutes until we need to wrap up. There's a question at the back there.
Yeah, just to follow up on that one, doesn't contradict it to your point on the first slide with regards to the policy, because that's exactly what you're saying. You need to implement in policy. I think where the worry is that you have people that implement the policy, doesn't follow the policy themselves. Otherwise, your point is contradicting to your first slide that you presented earlier.
No, I'm not fully following the question. What's the question?
Is it that the company that implements the policy also needs to have the people that steer the stakeholders in the business, the people that entry the data, to make sure they follow the process, follow the policy? Otherwise, you implement something, and then you have something that doesn't work in the end.
Yeah, so look, here I'm looking, the idea of policy is centered more around the fact, and I reflect on early days with some of my large corporates where back in the day when things were very decentralized, right? Today you're doing a lot more shared services. A lot of what corporate teams did in large organizations was they came up with policies, right? Which is we have a sustainability policy and now we leave it up to our business units to do the implementation. And you're right, this might or might not work. The difference today, which is what I'm saying, is doing the policy is not enough. You have to institutionalize and come up and define the way that you are going to implement, right? That's really what I mean. It's not enough to just define the policy and leave it up to someone else.
Yeah.
Okay, I hate to
I think there was one more.
Oh, go on then. Just one more. I'll get in trouble.
All right, very quickly. Costas, you mentioned that using AI to clean up data is a dead end. But my question is, where do you see AI playing a role in this whole industry, right? Or topic, right? Where do you see AI making a biggest kind of a quantum leap transformation in the process moving forward?
At least our ideas and where we see it adding value is removing the human from the workflow. So a lot of what we do today is processes, is workflows with our customers. But actually what I've realized, the real value eventually we're going to deliver to them is to get rid of them from being involved in the process. So I think AI can play a big role in approving tasks, okay? So a lot of the workflows we build today is, supplier will fill something in and then someone from the customer is going to have to review and approve it. And the problem you have here is the person from the customer reviewing and approving that is completely clueless on typically what they're reviewing and approving because they don't know if the VAT number or the tax number is accurate or the bank account number or is it the correct address. They don't, right? So here, an AI with third-party data can become actually very, very effective. Whereas getting AI to just clean up your operational data outside of a process, I think most large companies will find this as a problem because this is my financial system, which is audited, it's a validated system. I can't just go and have an AI changing or updating this data. So it's very much like a co-pilot use case or redundant things, right? We collect certificates and documents from suppliers. And again, the human has to open it to see, did they sign the document? I think an AI here will slot in very, very well that it can be very, very good at that. So I still think you need processes, by the way. So here I diverge a little bit from Eloise that in a large organization, there has to be some form of process, and then you remove the human, at least that's for me the next evolution, you remove the human from the steps. And when we're very comfortable with that, then we can say there's no process. Netflix can have no process because that's fine. It has no real impact on what I'm going to watch tonight or tomorrow. But these kind of things have an impact. You might pay the wrong supplier, right? You might do things which, you might commit fraud, all of those sorts of things. So that's how I see AI, at least for us, and what we're focusing on at the moment, playing a role.
Okay, that really is it. Thank you ever so much, Costas. Really appreciated it, and I hope that was useful. Thank you very much.